Welcome to This Story Needs to Be Heard with Lance Gunkel and Adam Steen. This Story Needs to Be Heard is a collection of stories from unsung heroes who are living a life of impact in Iowa and across the nation. This series is brought to you by Syverson Strege, a financial planning firm that exists to help enrich and empower your life and the community. Syverson Strege's focus is to assist clients to be good stewards of their resources to pursue their passions. Join us as we capture stories that need to be heard.
Hello, thank you for joining us today for the This Story Needs to Be Heard interview series. My name is Lance Gunkel. I'm the Managing Director at Syverson Strege. Joining me today is my colleague Adam Steen. Adam is the Director of Business Development. And Adam and I are excited to have joining us Peter Teahen. Peter, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to having a visit with both you, Lance, and Adam.
Well, as we prepared for the interview today, Adam and I realized that we think we've discovered the international man of mystery. Peter's experience is very broad and some parts are exciting, and we have just a short window of time with him, so we'll just be scratching the surface here. We will include Peter's vitae in the show notes, and trust us, you will want to read through them. This is not your typical resume. Peter is a funeral director, he's an author, he's a mental health professional, and a traumatologist. In 2011, he received the designation of Diplomate from the National Center for Crisis Management and the American Academy of Experts in Traumatic Stress. And again, we're just scratching the surface. So let's jump right in. Peter, I noticed on your vitae that you were about to embark on a project called the Flight to End Polio. And I would like you to describe that project, what you were going to do and achieve. I know it was something you were very much looking forward to. So I'll leave that open to you.
Well, it was a dream that was going to come true, and we're still looking forward to it, hopefully in this coming year. But I'm a pilot, have a single engine airplane. It's a 6-passenger single engine. It's called a Piper Lance. And I've traveled around the world, and oftentimes when I'm in these foreign countries, I say, it'd be really cool to bring my plane over here and just fly around these countries. So about 2 years ago, I started dreaming about it. And didn't really say much to my wife about it. And I started looking at routes and ways to get there. And it started really becoming a sincere effort to fly around the country, to fly around the world with a single engine airplane. And it was probably a year in the making before I even approached my wife on it. Because it was kind of like, this is so extreme, I probably won't do it. But then as I'm talking to people around the world, it became more probable. And give you a background statistics, there's only 700 pilots in the history of aviation that have flown a single engine airplane around the world. And alive today of those 700 are only about 264 pilots who have actually achieved this goal. So it's a very rare event. I did mention it to my wife. Dear, I'm thinking about taking my single engine airplane and flying around the world. And she said, really? And I said, who's going with you? And I said, well, I'm going by myself. And she said, probably not. You better find somebody to fly with me. So fortunately, her cousin, my cousin by marriage, John Oakenfels out of Iowa City, is a very adamant flyer too. And I went down and talked to him. I said, John, how about flying a single engine airplane around the world? And he kind of looked at me and thought I was crazy, as everyone else does at first. And the more I talked, by the time I left him after an hour and a half visit, he was committed to going. And then we really, because of he's a humanitarian as much as I am, and we're always finding ways of giving back to our community and to the world. And so we said, you know, we can't just fly this just so it's an accomplishment. We had to do it for a purpose. And John and I are both Rotarians. John's a former district governor. And we said, let's raise money for, and one of Rotary's biggest projects worldwide is eradicating polio. And they've made tremendous success in getting that feat. And in support of the Bill Gates Foundation has really made a lot of progress. And so John and I decided that we would do this flight as a way to raise money for Rotary and designate it specifically eradicating polio. And we estimated we were going to be able to raise $1 million on this flight, which would have been a big accomplishment. Rotary International is supporting us. As we started making arrangements to fly around the world, we were meeting with Rotary clubs all over the world, and they were hosting events for us, parties, events, meeting with government leaders, watching the programs, and bringing this flight into a true meaning of humanitarian giving, of doing it. And because we were Rotary, that again brought the Bill Gates Foundation involved, and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation pledged $2 for every $1 we raised. Wow. So the impact would have been incredible. We were 20,000 miles, 140 hours of flight time to 19 countries, taking out of Cedar Rapids, and we were originally going to fly up to St. John's, Newfoundland, and then straight across the North Atlantic for 10 hours over to the Azores and to Morocco, and then through Italy and India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, down to Singapore, and then up through the Philippines and Japan through Russia, and then come back over the Bering Strait into Alaska. But a lot of paperwork, a lot of planning, a lot of working with government embassies and consulates who were trying to figure out you're doing this for what and why. And lo and behold, we were supposed to leave in March of this year, and 2 weeks prior, we had to cancel it for COVID. And but it is still the dream. We are focused on right now, April 21st of 2021, and hopefully COVID will be taken care of by then, and we'll be vaccinated. But if not, we are committed to raising money to eradicate polio in the world. And we're inviting everybody to join us. Our flight is Flight to End Polio, and it's flighttoendpolio.com. And once John and I are in the air, you'll actually be able to watch us within like a 10-minute delay of wherever we're at in the world with the flight. And so for those who have a fear of flight, watch us on the video and is on the computer. But it will be an adventure of a lifetime.
Well, everything's been turned upside down this year because of COVID, and I know you'll get to do that trip. I can just imagine the stories you'll have as a result of those 20,000 miles. What I would like to know, what moved you from having this grand idea down on paper and just thinking about all the logistics that would have to, be gone through to make this happen, to having it be a reality and being ready to take off?
It was, in a way, it was a roller coaster because I love planning things. I love the detail and the excitement of finding out how to do things and how do you partner with other organizations, and how do most of the places, for instance, where we were landing didn't have the fuel we need. So we had to ship in 55-gallon drums of fuel, a lot of times by shipping lanes to get to the airport where we could get the fuel. And then we had to hand pump the fuel from these 55-gallon tanks into the aircraft. We actually had to install a 160-gallon fuel tank on the inside of the airplane. So because we only had 5 hours of flight time on the outside, and the leg across North Atlantic we estimated to be 11 to 12 hours. So we had to add a lot of fuel. But it was really became the reality when we had a purpose. You know, when we knew that we were going to hopefully make an impactful difference with polio and raising that money and awareness to eradicate polio. And in several of the countries like Karachi, Pakistan, and we were meeting with government officials in Karachi. Pakistan is one of the countries that is polio is very active in. And so, you know, the government officials were excited for us to bring that attention. But it was a lot of fear. It was like, holy cow, what are you doing? And then all of a sudden, when you made a piece of it work and a puzzle came together, you say, we're meant to be here. We're meant to make this trip. You know, the friendships we've created was an inspiration. But, you know, when you sit there in the middle of the night and you're thinking 10 hours across the North Atlantic, which means there's no rescue ships nearby. There's, you know, if you go down in the ocean, you know, we had major life preservers, satellite phones, all this equipment to get us to safety at some point, whether it was the middle of the North Atlantic or the jungles of the Philippines or somewhere in between. You know, you had there, it was, I looked at it as I talked a lot of my life, and we'll talk about probably a little bit here, the spirituality. You know, it became a mission that you knew had such great importance, you had to do it. And you had to make a difference. And the words, the communications were getting around the world. They were so excited that you know, I was no longer afraid. Somebody one time said, if you made a movie, they said, what would be the name of the movie about you? And I said, Never Be Timid. And it was kind of like, you know, believe in what you're doing, do the best you can, and then take a step forward. And if you sincerely believe about it and have thought about it and prayed about it, then somebody else higher than you are going to watch over you and make your trip safe. And that's what we ended up putting our faith into at that point.
Peter, that's just incredible. And I sit there and I think about how you've attached purpose to a mission. And it's that purpose that not only made the mission fun, but it made it achievable because you've attached that purpose to that mission. And I see, you know, a lot of folks nowadays that seem to really, because of this COVID thing hitting, they may have lost a sense of purpose and they've lost a sense of mission. And you don't seem like somebody that would do that. You seem like somebody that would continue to strive for that. I'm going to shift gears just a little bit, but to me, this still ties in with mission and purpose and not being timid. You received a call, a top secret call, a few years ago, and the mission that they told you about gave you only 2 hours to answer the question, either yes or no, and it was a life-changing decision from that call. Would you mind describing what the nature of that call was, and what, again, about you led you to say yes to that mission?
We were going to war. This was back in, back Operation Desert Storm. I've never been in the military. I was the last year of the draft of Vietnam, and they stopped taking recruits in at that point. We received a call about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and they said, is this Peter Teahen? And we have a series of questions to ask you. This is the United States Army from Germany. And, you know, if you answer no to any of these questions, we will end the call immediately with no explanation. And basically, it was a dialogue of, you know, we're going to war. They needed, I think they selected 35 funeral directors in the United States to respond to support operations. They expect a large death toll to nuclear, chemical, biological agents. That's why they were bringing us in. It was a situation where we could not tell anybody. We could not, tell anybody what we're doing, where we were at. We would be exposed to terrorist activities. We'd be exposed also to nuclear, chemical, biological agents. They couldn't guarantee our safety and that we'd come back alive. The mission was going to be like 9 months. We need your answer in 2 hours, and we want you on assignment in 4 days, somewhere in the other part of the world. And that's not a typical call I get on Friday afternoons in my office. I remember getting up and going to the other office where my wife works, and I said, "You'll never imagine the call I just got." And she said, "Oh yeah, I suppose somebody wants you to go off to war now," because that was the battle drums were beating all across the country. And I said yes, and they want me there by Tuesday. And I have 2 hours to give them an answer, and I can't tell anybody what I'm doing or where I'm going or where or any of that for 9 months. And she said, "What's your answer?" I said, "I wanted to check with you, but my answer is I'm going, because that's where I'm being taken." And it comes, and when I talk with all my disaster experience, I have, with World Trade Center and Oklahoma City bombing and all these things. When I lecture, I always say, especially emergency responders, you have to decide ahead of time what your answer is going to be. If we have a nuclear holocaust, or we had the terrorist attack of Oklahoma or 9/11, or in this case, war, I said, people's lives are at risk. You've been trained. You've accepted that role in your training and preparation. We need to know ahead of time, what our answer is going to be. So it really never made me pause at all to come up that yes, I was going, because there again, I look at a higher being protection of watching over me if I'm taken somewhere in harm's way. And it is that belief, that spiritual calling has taken me on many, scary roads over the years. But I've never felt that I was alone when I was on those scary, dark roads, because I knew somebody brought me to that point to help someone else. And that's always the mission. If I can make a difference to help someone else, that's been a lot of my philosophy in life. And, fortunately we didn't have the death toll we expected. But it is one of those decisions that really, a lot of times in life, I think we look at opportunities or experiences and they help us define who we are. And a lot of times, people ask, well, what do you do? Adam, Lance, what do you do? And then we start, or who are you? Or, we answer, who are you? Or what do we do by, what we do, we get our paychecks from. Yep. And I think the answer more of who are you or what do you do really is defined by what we do to help other people. What do we do to make a difference in life? What would your bio, what would your book about your life mean to you? And I'm always puzzled, I've always been puzzled when people say, oh, I couldn't do that, or I won't do that, or, I couldn't have that decision. And there was a quote I read the other day. It was said, if you refuse to do something because you're afraid you might die, then you're already dead. And I think that has a lot of purpose, because if you're so immobilized that you won't reach outside of yourself, then these experiences define who you are, and they create your inner definition. Not so much even so for the public, but what does it mean to you personally, that what you've given back to, what you've done to help other people.
Amen. Amen.
And Peter, knowing that you have been shot at, I know that you are willing to risk it for these things that you are so passionate about. I mean, I can see that, and I can appreciate that you have such a firm foundation. You know what you are led to do and called to do, that you're able to say yes to that call. It's meant for you. I Really
I've been
appreciate
shot
that.
at once. I've been held twice at gunpoint by terrorist groups, as they want to know what I'm doing there and, what my mission, I'm in foreign countries. But it, I just, looking at the barrel, I just wasn't afraid.
Wow.
It was just, I was brought here for a reason. And whether it was the front line of genocide in Darfur or another country where it was held by terrorists that was impacted by a disaster I was called into, I just stood, and I explained why I was there. And they let me go. It was a big sigh of relief, but, I knew what the outcome of both those situations. I think we really made a difference in the lives of a lot of people for the mission we were on. And, and I know when we were prepping for this, we talked about, the three important parts of life is, the physical and the emotional and the spiritual. And a lot of times, and when I talk about the spirituality of this part of my philosophy is not what religion you belong to or whether you belong to any religion. That's your personal religion. But the spirituality is really, in this definition, my explanation, is really what defines you or may help you define who you truly are in good times and bad times. It's easy to see the physical. We all maybe have a house or a condo or live, somewhere. The emotional, the tears, the anger, the frustration. But the spirituality is those are powerful, very powerful moments. And a mental health professional, when I'm dealing with people with PTSD, I always looking for that spiritual moment that put them at risk of having a spiral in their life that they won't come out of. But I give you an example of a spiritual experience I had that I think really defined for me. And that's all I was trying to define was for me. I responded to the Haiti earthquake a few years ago. I went in with a medical team as a mental health professional. It was kind of a fun trip. John Travolta flew me down in his plane, he and Kelly. So sorry to see Kelly die recently because on the flight, she and I sat on one of the couches in John's plane and just had an awesome visit. Both and John are such neat people. I've worked with them a couple times in disasters. But we went down to Haiti, was with medical team, and as things work out, I was one of three people. Myself, a dentist, and an LPN were placed in charge of a 50-bed critical care unit at the largest hospital in Port-au-Prince. Now this building, all the buildings were destroyed. Patients were being kept outside. They had a small area where they were doing surgery with no windows and generators while they worked. The intensive care where we had these 50 patients that aged from newborn twins to elderly people, from massive head injuries, traumas, to infections. These were people who were put there to die, basically. We were put in charge of them. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, if you're in that bad of a shape and you're in a hospital, do you really want to be taken care of by a funeral director, a dentist, and an LPN? It's not your persons of choice, but it's all that was available that night. And we were on the graveyard shift. They call it the night shift. Now imagine no electricity. The building is structurally unsound. If another quake happened or anything happened, the building would collapse around us. We went in, and this is all new for me, as well as the dentist. And we walked in and we said, IV bottles are empty. We need to go get IV bottles. And we had about 26, 27 patients on IVs. So I went to the supply room and I said, I need 26 bottles of IVs or bags of solution of IVs for our patients. He says, we have 6. Wow. He says, I'll give you the last 6. You go figure out who you're going to give them to and who's not going to have them anymore. And that was our first introduction to, a nightmare situation in a hospital where we had to go back and look at these patients with a flashlight and try to figure out what we had, because we had no medicine. We had nothing to work with. We had no electricity, nothing. And we still had to start pulling IV bags from people, knowing that this was probably not in their best interest, because we only had 6 to go. I can't describe to you how intense the heat, the humidity, the stench was in that hospital. I remember flooding with perspiration, as well as my other partners on the response team. And you know, as you're trying to help these people when you have nothing for the pain, you know, you have nothing, you know, you have these massive injuries, and you're just trying to provide comfort to them by being at their side to comfort them. I abandoned my patients. And I walked out and said, I can't take this anymore. I told the dentist and the LPN, I said, I can't take this. I've never been trained for this. How do we provide comfort to them? And I remember it was after about 1 o'clock in the morning. I sat out there in front on the steps of the hospital, and you know, saying, I can't go back in there. It's beyond my scope of ability. You know, how do you comfort a 90-year-old woman whose head is crushed and, you know, is struggling to stay alive, and you've got nothing for her, not even IVs. A little shortly after I left, the dentist came out, and he sat down. He too abandoned his patients. And he said, I don't know what I'm doing in there. He says, I'm a dentist. He said, no one's ever trained me for this. What are we doing? And he says, you're a funeral director. What are you doing? You know, and I said, I can't do it anymore. And we sat out in the steps for about a half hour. And we were determined we weren't going back in there because we couldn't take it anymore. And we finally looked at each other and said, if not us, then who? And it was, it gives me the chills as I'm trying to tell this story, because it was such a powerful experience to stand up. And I had long sleeve shirts on, and as I said, we were perspiring heavy, you could hardly breathe, and the stench was awful. And I ripped the sleeves off my shirt. And he did the same thing with his shirt. And he says, now it's time to go take care of our patients. And we walked back in that hellhole. And we started taking care of 50 patients who had no one else to care for them that night, no one else to hold their hand, no one else to comfort them as they died. And it was amazing, because as we worked in that dark, hot environment, I didn't sweat anymore. Wow. I didn't feel hot. I didn't smell the smells, and neither did the dentist. And the two of us looked at each other and says, what's happened? You know, and we were called to be there. And that was a very defining moment. That's what that spirituality moment was. And I look back in life and I think, I stood up and went back in because that's where I was needed. And so did the dentist and the LPN. What would have happened if I hadn't made that decision? And how would I live with that fact for the rest of my life? Yeah. And we didn't lose a patient that night. Wow. We didn't lose a single one. We comforted people. We treated them the best we could. A lot of times it was holding their hand or just trying to talk to them, and neither one, you know, they spoke Creole, we didn't. But our presence was there is what brought them comfort, and we lost no one that night. And the next morning, one of my worst patients, a young man who was an architect that was certainly going to die with the massive injuries and the infections that he had, I was able to convince him and his father, who was with him, to send him out to the USN Comfort, the big naval ship, hospital ship. And I vividly remember the tears going down my face because it was hard to get him on that ship. And we had to fight to get him on that ship. And I remember when the litter bearers came, and they came to take the patient, and he looked at me and he looked at his father and he says, thank you for letting me go. And never knew what happened to him, but I know his chance was on that ship. And on the night where I abandoned my patients, found the spirituality of the experience, went back to care for him, I believe that his life is saved, and somewhere in the world he's making a difference helping others.
Oh.
And that's the stuff I look for in all these rich traditions of what's the spirituality, what's the experience that reaches so deep into the inner core of your being and touches you and changes you forever and provides you strength and guidance for the future.
If not us, then who?
Right.
I'm hearing that at that moment you decided to change your definition of failure.
Mm-hmm.
And what you had to do in that moment was focus on the task at hand, no matter what that entailed. Even if you were uncomfortable with it or felt like you weren't prepared, it was something you had to do. And failure at that moment meant not doing it. And you decided that wasn't who you are. That's not who you are as a person.
Yeah. It wasn't an option at that point to fail.
That's one thing, as I just sit here and listen to this. I mean, for those listening to this, I mean, clearly see why, it's so hard to try to capture the essence of what it is that you do, because it's so deeply rooted in spirituality and in sense of purpose and sense of mission. And to Lance's point about redefining failure, you do not seem like a failure type of guy to me, as in it just doesn't exist unless you don't try. And in our prep, you talked about Teddy Roosevelt and in a quote from him that I think could really capture the essence of that. And knowing that you're a deep thinker and have deep meaning, I'm curious to know, and I think others would be, to know what that quote is by Teddy Roosevelt about failure and why it's so important to you in the context of everything that you're sharing here today.
Yeah, and it's a quote I came across a long time ago, and people will probably have seen it. I have it hanging on my desk, and as a funeral director, I have my funeral arrangements made, and this is the prayer, this is the verse that's going to be on my little folder that you get when you turned out. And the quote goes, "It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcomings. Who knows the great devotion? Who spends himself in a worthy cause? Who at the best knows in the end the high achievement of triumph? And who at worst, if he fails while daring greatly, knows his place shall never be with those timid and cold souls who know neither victory or defeat." And that kind of, I just carry that poem with me, or that verse. It's not a poem, it's a quote. And yeah, there's some times where I failed miserably, and there's some times where I've been successful and made a difference. But I know there are times where I'm called into a place that if I can save one person's life, if I can save someone else's life, or I can make their quality of life better, then I've given purpose to my life. I've defined who I am. And I'd rather fail at something trying, or somebody, at least try, than to sit back and say, I don't have time for that. I don't have, I can't do that. I won't even try doing that. And, there's sometimes there's people that can go out and I've been blessed in life to be able to be given the opportunity. I've done over 70 major disasters around the world. And I feel real blessed in that part, that I've been given that opportunity. And I understand there's people that can't do that physically or a lot of different reasons. But those are the people that support those who are out there making a difference. And, and it can sometimes be something as simple as a letter. I received a letter the other day by email. Somebody had seen a video piece that was done by the news on my work in 9/11, and she wrote this beautiful letter to me, and it moved me. And so her blessing, her gift was this letter that I've kept and put in my file, my keepsake file. But other people donate. They have the financial ability to do it, and they support organizations, or they support a cause, or they support a mission where, we could, it's like fight to end polio. I can't, if we're going to raise $1 million to eradicate polio in the world, I'm flying the plane. We're relying on people, the generosity, the gift of other people to make a difference. There's a lot of organizations, a lot of entities out there, a lot of things that people are on the front lines, and they're representing you. And I'm not soliciting money for the fight, but I'm just saying in that case, whoever donates to that fight, they're in that cockpit with me.
Right.
If I'm off on a medical mission in Haiti, if I'm giving comfort to those 50 people, and you're a financial giver, then you're right there at the hospital bed giving comfort. And so we have different ways of helping and different ways of being there. But I cringe when people say, oh, I can't do that, or I can't this, or I can't that. I always say, what can we figure out how we can do it? Because it's when we join together, team together, partner together, and can do something, life is so much better, and you have a spiritual experience that you always remember, rather than look back and say, oh, I should have done that when I could.
Yeah, Peter, your stories certainly prove to us that we can do those things. I'm thankful that you're out there still doing them. Your story is not done. But I would like to, we could end on Teddy Roosevelt's words, but I'd rather give you the final words and ask you to share kind of a final message with everyone listening. Something to help inspire them towards their pursuits and the things of which they're passionate about.
Inspire others. You inspire yourself, and by inspiring yourself, you will inspire others to make a difference. I'm a grandfather. I have 9 grandkids. And one of my goals as a grandfather is say, how can I inspire my grandchildren to take a mission or take a cause and do something about it and make a difference and know it makes a difference in their lives? And I think that's what we have an obligation to, when we get, the older we get, is to train the next generation to make a difference and to encourage them and give them opportunities, and do not talk down to them and say, don't do that. But encourage them, embrace them, and help them to be different. And don't be afraid of failure, and embrace those spiritual moments you're going to discover in life. Like I did at the hospital, or I've done on other disasters, where they will sneak up and catch you when you least expect it. And sometimes that can be really frightening. And sometimes we need to take those spiritual moments and go talk to a mental health person and say, hey, can you help me shake this out? Can you help me figure out what to do with this? And, that's okay. Take the leap, make a difference, and discover and define who you are. Because you're much more than the job you have 9 to 5 every day.
Well, thank you for that. take the leap, or sometimes take the flight.
Mhm.
I thank you for your time today. I know we could keep going all afternoon. I will encourage everyone listening to follow Peter's trek next April on Flight to End Polio. We know there is more to your story yet to be written. So, Peter, thank you. On behalf of my colleague Adam and the entire team at Syverson Strege, thank you for listening to the This Story Needs to Be Heard interview series. Everybody be well.
Thank you for listening to This Story Needs to Be Heard. If you know of a story that needs to be heard or would like us to help you in your pursuits, please contact Adam Steen at asteen@onlyworkforyou.com.